listening to Thunder Radio, the podcast of the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Centre.
Welcome everyone. Thunder Radio has been on hiatus for a few months, but we are very happy to be back. The school year is well underway and we hope everyone is enjoying the fall season. So this episode of Thunder Radio focuses on an exciting and educational resource that we are working on here at Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Centre. It is the Traditional First Nations Community Names Map. And Thomas and Val Bighetty, who are part of our Research and Development Department, have been working a very long time on the project. They are very passionate about it, and on this episode you will get to hear about the work they have done so far, and also how they will be adding to the project in the future. You will also hear about why historical projects like these are so important. So I hope you enjoy. So today we have Thomas and Val Bighetty in the studio. They both work here at MFNERC in the Research and Development Department, and they are here to talk about a project that they've been working on for quite a while, but it's a very interesting and informative and wonderful project. It's the First Nations Traditional Names Community Map. I think I said that right.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just have you both start by talking about what the project is.
Okay, thanks, Kim. One of the projects that we've been working on probably for the last 3 or 4 years is what we've called the Traditional First Nations Community Names Map. And the whole objective of this project was to show people that who are fluent in their language that they've always referred to their homelands in their own language before it was labeled an English name. And so what we had envisioned was to create a map visually, and the first phase, I guess, is what we call the printed version of the map. We've now evolved into the third phase. So the first phase was the printed version of the map. The second phase was what we've called the interactive version of the map, where it was in a multimedia format, so that it was more of visual. And we had interviewed people from the communities, which took a long time. I'll talk a little bit about later, I guess, of some of the obstacles that we've faced, just to give you a general idea of what we're trying to do now with what we're calling phase 3. And again, like just going back to the objective was just to show people that there's 5 different linguistic groups in Manitoba, and we wanted to have that visually represented on a printed version of the map to show that people, again, who are fluent in their language have always referred to their community, their homelands, in their own language, which is quite different from what what it's referred to, I guess, on what a traditional map, like a road map or something that's like an atlas map. And this project was to create kind of like a First Nations traditional names map. And so we did the printed version of the first map. And it's like, it's always ongoing. Sometimes, we don't always have the correct spelling of the name. So we've gone under, I think, four revisions. We've got actually 4 editions of the map, and it'll probably still continue to be revised. And second phase was to interview people from the communities for them to come on camera to pronounce the name in the language. And that took us a long time. Me and Val have been working on this project for quite a number of years, but we did complete it. And now we're going into phase 3, where we're trying to add on to the map of what we call the Community Histories project of the map. And maybe I can ask Val if she wants to talk a little bit of the Community Histories portion of what we're trying to do with this phase of the map.
Sure, Val.
Thank you, Kim, and Andy. I guess with the third phase, with the community histories, we just go out, same thing, go out and visit the communities or and ask them. We have a sample of questions that we ask if they don't already know, because some people prefer to be interviewed, do you know why you settled in this community? Like, I just came from Pangasi, so when I was there, I asked them, so do you know why Pangasi settled here? And then they had the story of, it was funny because they all pointed right. Well, we usually come from over here. Like, I don't know where they're pointing, but they all pointed right. So I'm like, okay, and they just go on with their story. So ask them questions, and they're more comfortable that way. And I think we interviewed so far with the community histories we went maybe 4 different places, and it's a struggle because not too many people want to come and go on camera and talk about their community. They feel that they don't know enough, and then the ones who know a whole lot about the community are not from there. So
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, and we prefer to have people from the community, but there are a lot of we do find at least one or a couple of from each community that just knows everything, absolutely everything, and they just have that love of history. So I'll just talk about, again, Pangasi. So I was up there, and it was really great because what Andy was talking about was the first, second, and third phase. And the second phase, where we interviewed for the traditional name, Pangasi was the only community that we could not find anyone. So we had to go ahead and proceed with the USB, like the interactive, the USB version, like with all the maps, and we didn't have anyone on the USB of Pangasi. We just had what the traditional name meant. So both Andy and I decided, like, we have to go up there to find somebody because it's pretty far community to get to. So I went up there just last week, and I've interviewed 5 people, and it was so nice to be up there, and they thanked me for going up there to interview them. So they were very grateful, and I was happy to be there. We should have done it a long time ago, but it's hard to get there. And, like, you have to fly out, jump a helicopter, and it was like, it's very hard.
Yeah. And did you find someone to pronounce the name?
Yes. Because I knew that the struggle of getting to Pangasi, so what I did was I got all 5 of them to say their name, where they're from, what Pangasi meant, so they all did that, and then we paused for a moment, and then they started talking about the community. So I really enjoy interviewing all these members, because as they're talking, like, you listen to them and then you just start asking them questions. So, like, through all of them, I was asking them all different questions, but there were other ones were sitting on the side listening. And then when the person was finished, they would come up and be like, I can't believe they didn't know that about the community, because I know they know what you were asking because I was with them. I'm like, well, sometimes people just don't remember, I said, but other people do. He goes, well, I'm going to talk about that. So it was really fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoy it. And you learn so much. Like, joining this project with Andy, I've learned so much about all the different communities, and you have to be very careful when you go to the communities as well. When I went to Pangasi, I know it's a Ojibwe community, but not everyone says they're Ojibwe, they say they're Soto. So I said, so which language do you speak here in Pangasi? And he goes, we speak Soto, but he goes, some people say it's Ojibwe. And I was like, yeah, I said, I wanted to ask that, but I said, because some people say Soto and Ojibwe are not the same thing, but then other communities say, no, we're only Soto, we're only Ojibwe, but then some people say it's the same language. So we learned so much out there.
Yeah.
So
just a quick question about phase 2. Speaking of the names, how many videos or people in total did you do for that part?
I'm not too sure about, I know for sure we have 64 well, 63, right, Andy? But now 64 with the one Pangasi,
Oh,
but we
yes,
have to
yes.
get that edited. But we try to get at least 4, for sure 2 to 4, because everyone has different, like what Andy
Says
was
it's
saying.
different, yeah.
Yeah, like some of them all have the same saying, but then like what Andy said, we'll be going to a different community and they were like, no, this is wrong. But then somebody else said it's right. So we just always say, well, we were told, we don't know if it's correct or not, but this is what we're told. And so if 5 people come and tell us, no, this is wrong, it means this, then we'll change it.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's, but for the most part, it's, most people all have the same
Understanding, same saying,
yeah,
same translation.
yeah. And they just have like different stories of how, like, they just have different stories of how they heard it. So that's really good to
Yeah.
hear too. So we get to hear everything. And it's
Yeah.
good to capture these because I know a few of the people that we interviewed, unfortunately, like after we interviewed them, they pass away. So it's like we're really fortunate enough to get them when we did. And that's what a lot of the communities too, they always like, come over to our community. Our elders are not going to be there for forever. So we try, but like with our budget, we have a limited budget, so we can't go everywhere. So we try the best we can and use our resources.
Yeah. So I'm sure budget is one challenge. Andy, can you talk about some of the other challenges you have faced with the project?
Sure. I just want to, before I forget, I want to talk a little bit more about what Val had mentioned about the history.
Sure. Yep.
I think it's really important, as Val had indicated, that it was a real educational experience for her to understand and appreciate like the history of the communities. And the real objective of this project is to preserve and promote that kind of history. I'm sure, I guess there's a saying that we're all products of our history. And what we really like to do with this project, again, is to try and take this kind of information and preserve and promote it through whatever format that we've developed so far, like the printed and multimedia version. And we also have a vision through the research and development program is the creation of an archives. And all of this information that Val was talking about with these different interviews is we'd like to archive that information so that information will be preserved for as long as we have an archives, which we would hope would be for a long time. And again, just getting back is we want to talk about why we came up with this project in the first place was the preservation of history, First Nations history, to educate all Manitobans as well as all people who are not fluent in their language, that the community members have called their community the traditional name, as Val had indicated, like Pongasi. Like I'm not fluent in the language, but I always want to know. I said, well, what does that mean, Pongasi? And through these interviews, well, we can say, well, at least I know a little bit more. This is what I've learned today. I now know a little bit of what Pongasi means. So what we see this project as being as an education project, like to educate people that these are what the names mean in the language. And I guess from what I understand is when you deal or when we work with the language people who are fluent in the language, that there's this concept of infusing the language into, I guess, the Western English language. So hopefully, like these kinds of names will then become part of the mainstream language, and that people know what these names mean. So that's really what we want to talk about, or what, I guess what another objective of the project is history, preservation of history through an archives, a proposed archives, as well as preserving it and making this information available to all Manitobans as well as all Canadians, so that this kind of history is recorded, it's there, and people become more educated. Because I think sometimes maybe the general perception is that people think that all First Nations people are one language group, and that hopefully we can educate people and say, well, there's 5 different language groups. And then Val had said, well, okay, well, sometimes we call the Anishinaabe nation as Ojibwe, but now we know that certain communities refer, I guess, to be referred as Soto. So, it's education in that sense. So that's just a little bit about the history of it. Now going back, the long answer to your question, going back to some of the obstacles. Again, what Val had said was when we first started this project, why it's taken so long is we want to try and do the best job that we can. But along the way, some of the well, what we encountered, I guess, was that some of the people are camera shy. They don't want to come on camera. Some of the people might say, okay, well, I'm not fluent enough in the language. I don't feel comfortable enough to come on camera. Or I don't feel like I'm, old enough, or I no longer live in the community. So those are some of the problems that we've encountered. So we try to develop when we're working on this, when me and Val say, okay, well, how can we overcome these different, not problems, but obstacles that we face. So what we're trying to do for this upcoming year is to have interviews for the Community Histories project, where Val had indicated where we interview people and say, can you give us a little bit of history about your community? And the objective there is to do 64 interviews and have them attached or inserted into this multimedia project, so that people say, okay, well, I want to know a little bit about the history of Prungasi. Okay, well, I know a little bit of what the name means, but maybe I want to know a little bit more of what it is. So then ideally these interviews that Val has did, then we can insert those into them, and then ideally have a product at the end where we have a multimedia project where we can have 64 interpretations of the traditional name and 64 history versions, and then we can ideally expand the project so that it becomes like an ongoing multimedia project. So those were some of the obstacles. This is the goal that we have envisioned for it. And then again, just going back that we believe that it's a good education tool, because I think somewhere along the way that a lot of these community histories might have been just at the local level, but they've never been introduced to the world. And that's what we're trying to do ideally with this project, is to educate a lot of the people, like a lot of people, of what the history of the community is, what the name means. These are some of the major families. Again, just going back to some of the questions that we just asked during our interview. Can you tell us why people have settled in this area? What does the name mean? What are some of the major families in the area? Because I think in conversations, if somebody tells you their surname, you can generally get an idea of where they're from. So when I hear the name Kakagamic, I think, okay, well, that sounds like an Ontario name. And so then I think, okay, well, when I ask you, I say, well, Kim, where are you from? And you say, well, that's my married name. My husband's from here. And I say, okay, well, that's pretty good. I can get a general geographic area from it, as well as, when Val's name, Val Bighetty, you get a general idea of where she's from. My last name is Thomas. I don't know how I got the history of the name Thomas, but it's interesting when you talk to other people and they can give you a little bit of history. Oh, did you know that Thomas name originates here? So it's really interesting, and it's really good. And I think all of us are all history. We enjoy history, and I think hope ideally through this project is that we're just trying to bring all of these historical facts into a project, and we enjoy doing it. And maybe we could just talk a little bit, I guess, of maybe I could ask Val to talk about of what we would like to do for this year in our work plan. like in terms of designating interviews in different urban areas, and some of the questions that we ask during these interviews.
Because you are looking for people for phase 3. So it talk a bit about what maybe people can expect, or if they're interested, or if they know someone who they think can contribute.
Yes, if anyone is interested, they can contact either Andy or myself. You could just call the Winnipeg office and they could transfer to one of us directly. But yeah, so for the communities that we want to interview, we made a little list of the communities we need to visit, and again, they're isolated, so we either have to travel, because we did try to contact these communities before, we usually call the school and ask for if they have a land-based teacher, because they usually know quite a bit, this is a known fact that all land-based teachers know everything about the community. So we usually go to them first, and then we or elders, we prefer elders, but for the community and anyone could learn that information. So we don't say necessarily an elder, we just say if you have an elder that has a lot of information, because it's not like they go and do the research, they've been there. So we like to speak to an elder, a community member that just heard all the stories, because there's always those community members that just know everything about the history, because they just have that enthusiasm to just ask, or sit with a bunch of elders and just listen. Or we go to the land base. So we like to, those are mostly our 3. But with the communities, we try to contact them, but like us, we struggle to get there and they struggle to get out. And if they're teachers, they don't exactly have time to leave their teaching to come do an hour interview. It just doesn't make sense. So I think this fiscal year, we're probably going to end up doing a lot of traveling, I'm thinking, into these smaller communities like I did to Pungasi. And it's worth it to go into the communities, because then everyone, I went to Pungasi, didn't have one interview schedule, and when I got there the night before, and then first thing in the morning, I already had my 5 within a couple of hours, who I was going to interview, so I just started right away. But as soon as we get in there, I'm sure we'll find them, but to phone around, nobody will come forward. So that's why I guess one of the reasons we're here, somebody will know somebody who would be very good to interview. So that's our goal, to find somebody who knows somebody.
Yes.
Who knows somebody.
Yeah, who maybe has a family member or knows an elder who'd.
Yeah, and we go into we interview into people's homes as well, because we know some members don't like to leave their home. They're comfortable where they are, or they can't leave their home. So we just grab the camera equipment and just go set up, make sure there's a solid background, and then we just interview right in there. So yeah, we'll go anywhere.
Yeah. And I think before I forget, I want to make sure we provide information about where the print map and multimedia map at the moment is available, and also your guys' contact information. So before we close things out, or not, but yes, Andy, you can, or yeah.
We have 2 maps, the traditional map and the treaty map, and they're both available at the Waverly office in Winnipeg. And same thing, you can either call the office and ask for Andy or myself, or we can go on the shop website. But it is free for all First Nation communities for the schools to receive the map. So if they give us a call, so they can call the office. And then the USBs, we have some more. We have USBs in the office, and we can mail them out as well. We are going to be reordering those, because those were I guess a hot commodity.
Oh, great.
They went really fast, and some people, when I was handing them out, they thought it was a joke, and they're didn't believe that. You're you seriously have interviews of all the communities? I'm yes, on here, on this little thing, you have all the communities. I'm yes. So they kind of find it hard to believe, But they explained that no, all the communities are on there, and I said, well, except for Pangasi, but now we could fix that.
Now
and
you have it, yeah.
yeah, so so all of that could be picked up at Unit 2, 1100 Waverly.
Or mailed out.
Or mailed out,
Yeah.
we can mail
Yeah.
them out.
Wonderful. So Andy, how would you like to close things off?
Well, again, I guess just to do a quick recap is that we're currently working on what we call phase 3, I guess. This one is the interviews for the history of the community histories version. We want to complete 64 interviews, or as many as possible, in some cases maybe 2 or 3 interviews, ideally. But once we've accomplished 64 interviews, then we would like to attach those interviews into our current phase 2 of it. Well, I guess not to complicate things, but to make it a really good educational tool for people to go to this USB or whatever format it might evolve into, to understand what the community name means in the language, listen to the person pronounce the name, and then also understand a little bit of the community history of it. That's what we want to do. That's what we're trying to do, to encourage people to come out and be part of this really good history project. It's not really phase 4, but we've also envisioned creating a Manitoba First Nations archives. I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
What we've tried to do is work towards the creation of an archives. Like in the course of our work, when we were doing creation of videos, we'd go to the Manitoba archives to look for historical photos. In some cases, we couldn't find them. We did a call out to the communities. We were bombarded with historical photos. We said there's a lot of stuff out there in the community that people would hopefully have an opportunity to showcase this kind of historical and archival material. So we're hoping that this community histories project, this traditional First Nations map, will kind of pave the way for having a place where people could come to and enjoy all of the First Nations history in Manitoba. We can't really talk about it. Maybe we can do another session at a later point for promoting this First Nations archives, but I guess just to conclude, this is what we're hoping to do with this phase 3, is to invite people to come and participate in these interviews. Maybe what we could do at a future point is have a write-up in the Arrow newsletter, maybe have some interview dates and locations posted on the website, and invite people to come to become part of this historical project and to let other people know about the history of your community. Thank you.
And actually, maybe if both of you could share one story or interesting fact that you've learned, or maybe the most interesting thing so far that you've learned about a Manitoba community that you didn't know before. I'm putting you on the spot.
I just need to think about which interesting fact, because there's so many.
There's so many, yeah.
I'll share one. I was always curious. I don't speak the language, but I know when I was working in different fields, there was always the PAW, a community in northern Manitoba was referred to as the PAW Indian Band, which later evolved into the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. And I always thought, I said, what does that name mean, Opaskwayak? And that's what kind of motivated me. Well, not motivated me, but I mean, it kind of said, okay, well, now I have an opportunity to find out what that name means. And so we interviewed an elder, William Laughlin, very, very nice, perfect gentleman, always prepared to participate in all of our history projects. So he explained to us, he said, this is what Opaskwayak means in the name. And I won't say it on through this interview, because I would like you to go to the map
Go and find out.
to find out what it means. And it's really interesting. And that's how the name Opaskwayak came into existence. And Opaskwayak has now become part of the language. People say Opaskwayak quite often when they refer to like the community of OCN. So it's really interesting. So that's what we were talking about, is infusing the traditional names into the language. So go to the map and find out what it means.
Yes, go to the map. Well, I know there was a lot of stories that I really enjoyed listening to, but I can't really think of one because there have been so many, and every time we went to a different community, like, and interviewed all these, like, you could just sit there and just listen to them. And when we do interview them, like, some of them are like, well, I don't really know what to say, and okay, well, answer these questions, and it'll probably only be like 10 minutes. We're like, that's okay, just talk. And then as soon as we start asking them questions, then it just kind of like opens up their mind or something, because they end up speaking for an hour. And like
wow.
and then when we're finished, they're just like, I can't believe I remembered that. Like, I didn't remember that, like, for all these years. And then as I was talking, it just came to me. So like hearing those kind of stories, like it's really nice to see them like just remember all these amazing things as they're a child, and traveling, and like everything from because most of the members we interview, they're not that old. Like they're not, well, I guess some people consider elders like ones who have a lot of knowledge, but these are just like elderly people. But so they've seen a lot. Like most of them, their communities didn't have hydro, they didn't have roads, the church wasn't quite there yet in their community. The schools were like this, well, the schools, they didn't have schools. So they remember all this, and just hearing all that information, it's really nice and very educational. Like we learned, well, I can't speak on Andy's behalf, but I've learned so much on this project. And it's funny because when I talk to my friends, like I always like, they say something and I'll correct them like, no, and I'll say something like, well, actually, I'm like that because they're like, oh yeah, that's where Crees live up over there. I'm like, well, actually, no, that's Dene land. So they're like, okay, miss, then they'll tease me about something. But it's like people aren't aware of like what Andy was saying earlier, like of all, like there's 5 different language groups. Like I was one of them. Like I'm from OCN, and really I thought it was just Cree everywhere. So I had when I left the reserve the first time, I was like, oh, Ojibways were the first ones. I'm like, oh, there's Ojibways, and then found out there's Dakotas and Dene, and like there's the Island Lakes. So there's a lot of languages out there. And what Andy said, a lot of people just kind of group us all together, and can't group us all together because we're not all the same. We're all different, and we have different languages, and we come from different parts of the Manitoba, and there's a lot of information from those language groups. But yeah, once the phase 3 goes on, well, I guess it would be once we get all the community histories into the USB, that'll be a lot of good information for all the communities. And that's what most of the members I interview say, like, we need to teach these young children all this information because they don't know it. So they're slowly teaching them, but they said they need to learn more about their own community first.
That was Andy, Thomas, and Val Bighetty. Thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you all for listening. We hope you will join us next month for another episode of Thunder Radio.